Well, the much-anticipated Fees Commission report has recommended that the government should increase the budget for tertiary education in the country. The Commission into the feasibility of fee-free higher education and training said currently there's no capacity for the state to provide free tertiary education to all students in South Africa. President Jacob Zuma established the Commission into the feasibility of fee-free higher education and training in South Africa in January last year. Well, the report says that all university students, regardless of their family background, should be funded through loans sourced from commercial banks. Now, that's one of the recommendations from the Commission on the feasibility of fees-free higher education. The Commission was precipitated by demonstrations by university students demanding free education. The report says South Africa should increase spending on higher education to 1% of our GDP to cater especially for poorer students. The Commission recommended the scrapping of application and registration fees. The Interministerial Committee on Higher Education Funding, led by the Minister in the Presidency, Jeff Radebe, and the Presidential Fiscal Committee, led by Minister of Finance, Malusi Gigaba, are now processing that report. Well, earlier our reporter, that's Nomawethu Sawandle, spoke to the UCT SRC member Sisha Lonzi, who's at the Cape Town University for reaction.
The management, now we know that there have been a couple of protests here at UCT. In fact, the university even got a court interdict to prevent students from protesting, saying that they really wanted to finish this academic year. But we know at the forefront of those protests, students have been saying that they want the Fees Commission to release that report. And of course, that has happened today. And joining me now just to unpack this report, we are joined by Sihle Lonzi, who is a student advocacy from the SRC group. Sihle, there are a number of issues that are going on here at UCT, but of course we do know that the presidency has finally released that report. What is the mood amongst the students today?
Yeah, I think first I must definitely acknowledge the fact that the report is 752 pages long. I've had a brief look at it, but I've not quite done the work in terms of to see what it actually deals with and what it covers. But I think I want to state on the record that the report, if you look at it, it deals with the feasibility of free education in South Africa. And hence why even in 2020, when it was made, I think late 2015, 2016 or so, students in fact rejected the report because students are saying we are not here to ask questions of feasibility. The questions of feasibility have been long resolved by students. What we need now is the necessary political will, the necessary political backbones by people who can make pronouncements. I mean, if you read the conclusions of the report itself, it doesn't really pronounce on anything. It merely makes recommendations, but ultimately it becomes the president together with the ministerial committee who then pronounces whether or not there will be free education. That is what the students are precisely waiting for. But I don't want to completely write off everything. I do want to give myself time and the students time, of course, to have quite a read through the report, what it deals with. I mean, we've also seen things of loans and also the banking sector. I mean, that is another thing that we see that students in South Africa are in too much debt. If you look at the so-called missing middle or black middle class South Africa, also in a lot of debt. We can't have a situation where someone is to graduate and they spend the first 10 years or even 15 years of their life working to pay off the fees provided there. So again, we will look at the report, but I think we must acknowledge the fact that we've agitated for its release and it has been released, but now we must then take the next step, which becomes the call that is made by the president with respect to the report.
I actually wanted to ask you that question before you went into it about bring in commercial banks and scrap NSFAS.
Yeah.
What's the issue? Why is NSFAS not working at this point? And do you think that it needs to be scrapped? Is this a viable sort of solution to what we see at universities across the country?
Look, the idea behind NSFAS and loan and student debt, it does not deal with free education and what it is that we are asking for. And we know that ultimately, I mean, whatever you say the state is, ultimately there must be a buy-in from different sectors from the country for free education to be. So we recognize the responsibility that must be played by the banks. We recognize the responsibility by the private sector in general. But what we don't want is we don't want a situation where the education system then becomes slave to the banking sector. Because what you'll find then is that banks will start to dictate what it is that happens at the universities. You know, perhaps we can find a situation where they say, maybe we don't want to students who are doing art. Music is perhaps not what we're speaking of. can we get more accountants? Can we get more of these things? That is not what we want. We want the people to be able to learn whatever it is that they want, and we don't agree with the idea of education being a commodity. So yes, though we recognize that the private sector does have a role to play, but I think we must be very careful in terms of how that is facilitated. Otherwise, we can find a situation where the education system is at the helm and becomes slavery to the banking sector.
And tell me, Sihle, were student groups actually given a chance to give information as into how this report was done? And upon reading what has been released now, do you see any information where, this is information that the students gave, or do you feel that you've been pushed out completely?
Look, I think particularly, I don't want to speak for everyone at a national scale, but if I just make a quick, example of UCT itself, there was a situation where UCT provided a submission to the Fees Commission report, but the wrong thing about that was that there was never a UCT consolidated submission. Max Price, the VC, one morning, whoever he deliberated with, whether it was the executive, whether it was council, they then decided to come up with this thing and they handed it in to the Fees Commission report. So already we are seeing that it becomes disingenuous, because though the public may view it as it is coming from the VC of UCT, that becomes a UCT report, the different stakeholders in the institution did not have the time to really consolidate a particular position of free education and submit it. So, I did hear that at a national scale there were calls from different, social groups and society movements to try and make submissions to the commission. But if you look at the commission, again, I do want to acknowledge the fact that I've not quite read everything comprehensively, but it doesn't seem as though it reflects any of the things that students have spoke of. The fact that we are still have to be debating things of loans, the fact that we are still debating an FSAS, the fact that we are even debating feasibility. That is something that students are not looking for. So again, I want to set the fact that, look, the commission is recommendations. We have long seen its role, and hence it was rejected. But now we then want to test the backbone of the state, want to test the political will of the president and the ruling party to be able to pronounce on free education for all for 2018.
Just one last question, Sihle, before I let you go. I know that you've been meeting with management today. You expected you might be going back into that meeting. What are negotiations about at this point, and where are you?
Yeah, of course, now UCT is under a lot of pressure because exams are to start Wednesday. It's 2 days' time or so. So they want to meet, they want to resolve the issues. We had met this morning, but the negotiations had collapsed because UCT is saying it doesn't seem there's a ceasefire from the students themselves. But we are saying no. What causes the students' frustration is the presence of private securities, the presence of police on campus. If you go on upper campus, there's this creation of this center of sort. Students are now starting to call it the concentration camps because it is highly militarized. There's German Shepherd dogs patrolling all around campus. So this does not become an environment that any student is able to write an exam and perform at the particular level. So I think that is where we are, but they have promised that they will meet us again. So let us hope that they were genuine in that call. And we are always open to negotiations, because I know people get the sense that they think we don't want to write exams. I don't know, perhaps we didn't get the distinctions that they got coming into UCT. But we also, more than them, in fact, I want to argue, we are also committed in the completion of the academic year. But we are not going to do it at the expense of black students who will not be able to come back next year simply because of financial exclusions.
Thank you very much for your time. Well, that was Sihle Lonzi. He is the SRC Student Advocacy Chair here at UCT, talking to us about how things are looking here at this university after the president has released that fees report, saying, this report doesn't speak to us. It doesn't speak to what we want. We want the president to announce that he will give us free education, not feasibility, not what we should do or what we see happening around the country at this point. As students, we want free education. Of course, he did say that they'll be meeting with management again a little bit later on, just to talk about issues that are happening here and whether exams will start next week, Wednesday, or not.